Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With us today, we have Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
Very good. There's no peace and quiet throughout the world today.
No, that's for sure. Yeah.
And I wonder if this is a real first regarding these assassination. I wonder if a president has ever had this being the distinct presidential candidate or a president that has been attempted to be assassinated twice. But, you know, he had a distinction. They impeached him twice.
Yeah.
So now they have to go and attempt assassination.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's pure, crass politics that moves and motivates a lot of people. And sometimes it's a bigger picture. And you know, I've been conditioned over the years, having been really involved in the thinking of it, no, not literally, about the Kennedy assassination. And so mark me down as a skeptic.
Yeah.
And it took me a while. You know, I was another thing that took me a while was to see what FDR's reaction was for the individuals in Japan and America trying to stop World War II.
Yeah.
And I think I didn't. No, that couldn't be true. If he do this deliberately, I just didn't believe that. But if you read the history, you have to come around to thinking he couldn't have been that stupid.
Yeah.
There was always a purpose for the war, and now that's what's going on right now. There's always a purpose for all this. But this was big news, another attempted assassination, little less close call, but it's still a big deal. And just like the one a couple weeks ago, my immediate reaction is, it's going to be tough knowing all the facts.
Yeah.
And it didn't take long. It took about 30 minutes for the waters to get muddied up.
Yes.
And because it's never, so far, generally speaking, it's not usually a lone wolf doing all this.
Yeah.
And if one looks into how much planning went into the JFK assassination, one realizes it doesn't happen by a lone wolf, but it also raises the question of they're not very good at it.
Yeah.
You know, rifles laying around and whatnot. So I think so often things are staged. And the one thing is in these many killings that have gone on over the years, they usually have some patsies in there. You know, people that they can put the blame on. So generally, I'm immediately looking for another source and trying to put it together. And I haven't done that yet, and a lot of people will, and I'm going to try my best to understand it. But this is a messy situation. It's really sad, and maybe the big picture of the descent in this country, in this world, of the bankruptcy, the moral, ethical bankruptcy of so many, as well as the financial crisis going on, and the chaos that is building in our streets, and the people who talk outward. And even in this case, the word fascist comes up in a serious manner. And it's not like just something theoretical. Oh, yeah, that was something that happened. There were a bunch of fascists that gave us trouble during World War II. I mean, this is active stuff. And like Antifa, you know, that's another one. They were actually talking about having fascists put upon us. But, well, it's a long distance from peace and prosperity that we advocate, but I still believe that there's room for us in this debate because they're creating the chaos, and they claim they can make it worse with chaos. I claim that if we're smart enough and productive enough, that we ought to be able to replace this monster with some more ideas about peace and prosperity.
Yeah, well, I was sitting by the pool yesterday. I was uploading the last of the speeches from our conference. That take a long time, trust me, a long time. Just about done with them, and then I started getting a whiff. I was just surfing through Twitter X, getting a whiff that something had happened, you know. And it's interesting how it works on there because you start getting a whiff on your feed that something is going on, something has happened, and as you go, you'll see people in real time getting more details, reporting more details and aspects of it. But then when the mainstream media starts talking about it, they start, like you said, obfuscating. They start getting their narrative down. They start getting their line down. And if you can watch it on Twitter X in real time, people refuting what the mainstream media is saying, people debunking what they're saying, people debunking the line of what they're saying, and it happens in real time. So it's really fascinating to watch. And for all of its faults, I'm sure there are plenty of faults on Twitter and with Elon, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people criticize him. They'll probably criticize us in the comments. But at least you can have this service where you can watch things, people who really do investigate. But one of the first things, I guess the first thing we're considering on this is the idea of blowback. And it was, thankfully, our friend Bernard at Moon of Alabama, and I've read Moon for 15 years or so. I mean, back on the Hill, I read it regularly. Always very insightful, don't always agree with it, but put on that first clip because he makes a very good point. And I wanted to clip it and send it to you because, of course, you made the concept of blowback famous in your presidential debate. But the title of his was West Experiences Blowback from Fostering Fascists in Ukraine. And so the point that Bernard is making is that, and go to the next one, is that for years now, ever since 2014 even, we saw the rise of the far right in Ukraine. We saw the swastikas and this and that, all this business. And everyone said, oh, just ignore it. We saw the extremism. And what Bernard is suggesting here with this piece, and it's certainly worth reading, Dr. Paul, is that the Azov and these extremist national groups, we supported them, we propped them up, and we're propping them up in the war. We meaning the U.S. government. And now it's time for blowback. Just like what you said in the Giuliani moment, we were propping up the Mujahideen, we were propping up the extremists because we had to take out the Soviets. Boom, came the blowback in the form of 9/11. And Bernard's suggesting that this is related to that, and I think it's a pretty good thesis.
You know, this doesn't require a great deal of intelligence because it's very logical. To try to convince me otherwise would be difficult because I think it's so logical that if you do certain things to people, there will be a reaction. And one thing that I think is a truism is that people identify with their home territory, their homeland, their country, and their traditions, rather than just the political atmosphere that they defend in the country. But that gets thrown in there too. So this is something that has been going on, and the blowback should be expected because if you look at war. The people who identify with the home team, it doesn't add up to just the number of weapons. What about Vietnam? How many bombs did we drop, and how many people died? But they didn't kill the spirit of Vietnamese people. And I always use for that example is we achieved a lot more in peace than we did in war. And by recognizing this principle, the people want their homeland. And then when you attack it, expect it. Matter of fact, I didn't invent that term. I used it. Maybe a few people were exposed to it, but it was the FBI.
The CIA,
The CIA, yeah. I'm sorry, the CIA. They're the ones who created this as somebody was probably looking at it, in a definitive way, an intellectual way. You know what? This could backfire on us, and it continues to backfire. And I think that's what we're witnessing tonight.
And we're seeing. This is the embrace of extremists overseas to do the dirty work that the neocons and the deep state in the U.S. want. And of course, the byproduct of that is the blowback. And this may well be the blowback. Here's a guy who was watching the mainstream media at the behest of the deep state, lionizing these extremist groups in Ukraine. These are the freedom fighters. These are the heroes. Don't notice the swastikas on their armbands. They're just a little bit kooky. Don't worry, they're on our side. So he's being bathed in this intellectually for years, and he finally acts out on it. Here's a guy who wants to be president who says he's going to end this conflict. I've got to take care of this. I can't let this happen. So this could be very well a form of blowback. If you put this one on, and this is where Bernard, I think, makes an important point. If it's true, and if this is a form of blowback, go back one if you can, please. He makes a good point. Bernard from the Moon of Alabama says, members of Azov and other nationalist groupings in Ukraine are now experienced fighters. They have the means to fight, as there are lots of Ukrainian weapons in unaccountable hands. Now remember, we talked about this early on, Dr. Paul. The Pentagon can't account for these weapons, so they're floating around, and these extremist groups are emerging now. And so Bernard concludes by saying, These weapons can be easily smuggled into Europe to target any politician who dares to pressure Ukraine into accepting the end of the war. The attempted assassination of Trump is only the first of such incidents. The motives for all assassination attempts against Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico are still unknown. Many such incidences, predominantly in Europe, are likely to follow. And just go ahead, here's Kit Clarenberg from the Gray Zone, who makes the point on Fico. If you go to the next one, easily forgotten that another hardcore Ukraine ultra with indeterminate international connections recently tried to murder as an elected leader due to his stance over aid to Kiev. Remember when Fico first got into power in Slovakia, he said, we're going to stop exporting weapons. Boom, a couple weeks later, he's shot in the stomach by a pro-Ukrainian extremist.
You know, the point you make about how these weapons are shifted around and how much it was wasted, we shouldn't be doing it anyway. And it is contributing to the bankruptcy. But what about the weaponry that they're discussing even in this campaign from Afghanistan? Just think of what happened. What about Libya and the weapons going to Syria? It goes on, but they never stop because, you know, the people who build weapons, I think they don't care, and they might even say,
yeah, that's good news.
They're ready to go. We have to replace them because they actually use the theoretical stockpile, which doesn't serve that purpose, but we have weapons to defend in case somebody invades us. So now they said that we don't touch those unless we're invaded, but they're running out of weapons, so they're using those to pass over to Ukraine. So the process continues, and this is the big question I think that comes up, you know, and Edward Snowden brings it up. How much did our government know? Did our government know anything about this? How could they not know? I mean, you think, and even after this mess they had a month ago, you know, and how bad so Secret Service was. Oh, we're going to clean up our act, and it's happening again. So it's something that you have to wonder, especially if you know how much was involved in the manipulation of the CIA and the FBI and everybody else involved during the various assassinations, you know, all through the 60s, whether it was Martin Luther King or RFK or JFK. It takes a combination of things. It's not very often that somebody achieves the assassination. I don't know whether it ever happened. A president without some benefits coming from a sympathetic person. That doesn't mean that the CIA contributes or the Secret Service contributes to the people who want to assassinate a leader. It means that people in high places and have control are able to do it, and I'm sure there are decent people who honestly think thought that this is a benefit for our national security. But what do? We say, these are good people. Why don't we reward them for telling us the truth? We want the truth. Yeah. So they do, and they end up in prison. Yeah, that's the tragedy.
And I think what it's easy to forget sometimes is we use it as a term of convenience, but the CIA is not a monolith. You know, there are analysts over here and agents and people that do sort of mundane things, counting missiles and whatever they do. And then you have these other parts of the CIA that are involved in deeper cover, deeper covert, and probably a lot of parallel organizations. So when we say it, we mean sort of this government within a government that's not accountable. But you mentioned the point of how much did the government know, and that raises the question of, was this some kind of an inside job? You know, I mean, we've talked about it on the show before. Poor old Scott Ritter, he's writing a couple of articles that the Justice Department doesn't like, so they raid his house, they produce all of his text messages that he sent, all of his emails. We've been monitoring you for a long time. So you have a guy who's writing something they don't like, they monitor him, they raid his house. Well, here's a guy, now put on the next one, Max Blumenthal did a deep dive. The guy wrote a book, this Ruth guy wrote a book. Would-be Trump shooter Ryan Ruth published a 291-page book, Unwinnable War. about about his time in the Ukraine International Legion, Ruth said he'd like to see Putin assassinated. He seems to hope for Trump's assassination as well, and he calls for U.S. to instigate a nuclear war with Russia. So all of this stuff happens in our secret services. We had no idea about it, and Scott Ritter and Dimitri Simons and others, they know everything about them every time they, brush their teeth or something.
It keeps bringing back to memory when I first went into politics way back in the 70s. I was in communication with somebody that was considered far right, very conservative, but a constitutionalist. And this subject came up about the CIA, and he had been in the FBI and knew a little bit about the origination of the CIA, and he assured me with confidence, and I took it all in. He says, if you have an organization like the CIA, you cannot have a republic, because that is the source of it. Just think of what's happened over all these years, and my argument in my little booklet is that there was a coup, especially the technical coup that took control of our judicial system was in the 60s with these assassinations going on. So, but the coup is continuing, it's expanding, it hasn't dwindled, nobody's caught on to it, and now I don't have the evidence, but how could the Secret Service be that stupid, especially on that first assassination? There were so many things that were so bad, and this one isn't a whole lot better.
Yeah.
My first view of this, because it looks like they weren't doing the job there either.
Yeah. Well, here's a good article that I think, they're great at summarizing. Our friends over at Zero Hedge are great at summarizing a lot of stuff and putting it together quickly. So for convenience, and we tip our hat to them for the hard work they do. But here's a great article we both read this morning, and it really, is in the category of how could they not have known something was going on? So would-be Trump assassin palled around with the neo-Nazi Azov Brigade in Ukraine. What did the government know? And that's a good question. I have a couple clips from this article. Go to the next one. So this guy keeps going back and forth to Ukraine. He's staying in Ukraine. He's actively recruiting soldiers to fight in this war. He's meeting with officials, and somehow the U.S. government doesn't know. I don't know. So when he arrived in Ukraine, according to these media reports, the 58-year-old Ruth himself was considered too old to fight along with the Ukrainian army. So Plan B, he described to one outlet, was to come to Kiev and promote the idea of many others coming to join the International Legion. We need thousands of people to fight alongside Ukrainians. Now go to the next one. In March of 22, just a month after the Russian invasion, he tweeted that everyone around the globe should be willing to volunteer and fight and die in Ukraine. Still, much of his time was reportedly spent in a hotel room in the far western city of Lvov. So here he is sitting in Ukraine, trying to recruit people, go to the next one now, to come fight in this war. Among the more bizarre aspects to his campaign, and this is the part where I just don't believe the U.S. government doesn't know about this, Dr. Paul, among the most bizarre aspects, he says campaigning on behalf of the Ukraine Military Foreign Legion was his efforts to recruit U.S.-trained Afghan special soldiers to go to Ukraine's front lines. The initiative appeared so large in scale, given Ruth was seeking to transfer hundreds or even thousands of Afghan fighters, according to his words, that one commenter questions, in light of the attempted assassination of Trump, who was he working with in the U.S. government that was allowing him to do this?
Well, it looks like there may be implants. There's a conspiracy going on, and they're participating in this. But that is something that, as long as we have the type of foreign policy we have, there's going to be this type of resentment and blowback, and it would be abnormal not to. It's because that's why it's so obvious. I don't think when I think and try to talk about monetary policy, I claim that if I had a group of young people, 12 and under, I could teach them about inflation pretty fast. And I would think in foreign policy, matter of fact, young people do respond to the logic of staying out of the internal affairs of other nations, not have these entangling alliances, and especially the ones that have to pay the price, and that's the young people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's just a couple more on this, I think, just because I think it's important. Now, skip one and go to the one the Times had documented. Now, this is the guy who is over and over on the mainstream media. He's been interviewed Newsweek, New York Times, over and over. He's not like he just emerged out of nowhere. Put this next one on. The Times had documented that Ruth, now listen to this, Dr. Paul, he planned to move volunteers, in some cases illegally, from Pakistan and Iran to Ukraine, and claimed that many had expressed interest. So here's an American. He keeps going back and forth to Ukraine. He's recruiting people from Iran, maybe, in Pakistan, to go and fight, and the U.S. government has no idea about it. I am not buying that, Dr. Paul, and I'm sure our audience doesn't either. Now go to the next. He's actually negotiating with the Ukrainian government as well. The next clip, clearly this doesn't look like a guy who had no connections in Ukraine or was merely some war tourist on the side of the Ukrainian government. And Azov, as Azov would have us believe, the question remained, what did the U.S. government know about this radicalized individual, and when did they know it? Did he have help from U.S. government officials in his Ukraine travels and recruitment campaign? Why wasn't he investigated years ago? And I'll just cap this part off, and you mentioned Snowden earlier. Snowden also had this creepy vibe. Put it up here if you can. This is what Snowden tweeted out yesterday. He said, "We know little so far, but with alleged Trump shooters' personal and public participation in military activity in Ukraine, it's hard to imagine the White House agencies can claim zero contact, clean hands. Something of an Oswald vibe here. Congress should get answers." That's chilling.
And there's a better chance that's going to happen under the conditions we have, even with the mess in Washington and the flip-flopping and the bipartisanship that's doing the wrong things. But there are some people in the House especially that might play the role of really checking this out. And, one thing is that I find out this information they got that information within hours. And the question that was raised is why didn't they do something about it? Well, maybe they were. Maybe they dig that out to hide it or use it or promote it.
True.
And that's why it exists. But but the fact that our friends are publishing this now rather quickly, which means that where do they get for information? Well, maybe the internet helps a little bit here and there. And so the internet can provide this, but it's also the reason why there's such a battle over the internet right now. Who's to decide? Who's going to be the truth squads? Who's going to tell you, oh, this is truth and we're going to allow it to be up? The attack on the First Amendment. And that's why over the years I've always said that the First Amendment is precious. and the fact that if you put them all into prison, but that's what is happening. We already mentioned about the whistleblowers. They can get up in prison. And that makes others ones, I could do this and tell them this. I just don't have it. The odds of them putting me in prison are so great, So it's a tough decision for them to make.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to do one other thing, because the other thing that hit me this morning, Dr. Paul, is that what if there, this is going to sound a little bit kooky, I guess, but what if there's some kind of this conspiracy within the U.S. government, the government against the government? On the one hand, you have half of the Secret Service protecting Trump, and the other half launching plots to have him assassinated. And it sounds crazy, and I wouldn't have said it earlier, but this is really interesting. Now, Emma Ashford, who's an analyst, foreign policy analyst, she put up this little clip from a New York Times article, if you can put that one up. So this is the New York Times. In the interview, Mr. Ruth said he was in Washington to meet with the U.S. Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, known as the Helsinki Commission, quote, for 2 hours to help push for more support for Ukraine. The commission is led by members of Congress and staffed by congressional aides. It's influential on matters of democracy and security and has been vocal in supporting Ukraine. Now, that is an understatement to say that it has been vocal in supporting Ukraine, because we have Ruth going in there to meet them. But guess who was the head of the staff at the time? Go to the next clip, and openly so. This is the Helsinki Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe has appointed Paul Massaro as staff director. Massaro is a dedicated advocate of ultra-far-right ideology in Ukraine, openly idolizing Nazi collaborators and mass killers like Stepan Bandera. This is the personnel director, Dr. Paul, of that commission. He is a U.S. government employee holding up a pro-Nazi flag and wearing on his shoulder a patch commemorating a person who fought in the SS brigades with Hitler. I mean, that makes you wonder how deep this conspiracy goes.
Yeah, and you know, if you could have division, this would be very good, but I'm a little bit leery of it because I'd like to see more activity where people are being challenged. Because I see that in politics, like the Republican Party will have dissenters more so now than before.
Yeah.
And yet, ultimately, you could put a person in charge of the House that states the position of the conservative, then all of a sudden crumbles, you know, because there are real arguments there, but it's also the argument that people get squelched on. Think of this recent vote, this bipartisan vote. I think it was money for Ukraine. What was it like? 30 or 40 Republicans voted against it, but I think that's the way things crumble, but it's also information, and that's why we have to do our best and continue and encourage people to join us to send these messages, to know what the messages are. First, we have to get the information. That's why hopefully we can contribute to that, getting the right information, and go to the people we respect and we've trusted before. Because instead of, I complain all the time about the shortcomings of the internet, but I think that's a tool that that is very, very valuable for reaching a lot of people, because somebody told me once that some of my stuff goes out to more than 1,000 people every day.
A lot more than that.
So, and I was like, where'd that come from? So the ideas and spreading the ideas is the tool that has to be used, not more guns, except we have to have a lot less guns. I've always argued, I'm for gun control. Take the guns away from the government.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, we don't know the answer. We can only ask the questions. That's what our job is, and I'll just close by thanking everyone for listening to us ask the questions, and, do your own research, as they say. Don't believe anything. And if you wouldn't mind, hit that thumbs up and like wherever you're watching or listening to this program to help us spread the word. And we appreciate you. Over to you, Dr. Paul.
Well, I think the big picture is what I like to look at, because you can fit all the little pieces into the big picture. I think the idea of avoiding the advice of the founders and getting involved in entangling alliances explains a whole lot, whether it's NATO, United Nations, or whatever. And it is that removes the concept of respect and love of one's own country, and allowing people to live peacefully without the interference of their own local government and without the interference of international government, which has gotten us into trouble. Take the thing in Ukraine. I don't think that could have happened without us being over there and use of the NATO, defying some of the promises and innuendos that we have had and promised after the Cold War ended. So it was that violation that got us into this trouble. But when we get into these entangling alliances, what we do is we believe in intervention, and it's bold, it's trade, it's taxes, it's finances, it's military, it's all this stuff that goes on, and it encourages the people who do believe that there is no such thing as truth, there is no such thing as national law, natural law, and therefore they say, whoever is the shrewdest and the best liar, wins the cake. Well, I'll tell you what, until the cakes and pies are gone, and then there's something else has to come about. And that is what happens to empires. And we are now witnessing the disintegration of the American empire, and we should be pleased that we have an opportunity to participate in the development of a system much closer to the founders and the Constitution than what we've been putting up with for the last 100 years. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.